A stubborn issue being addressed around the country, the economic plight of Black Americans. They are the poorest U.S. racial group, less economically secure and more dependent on government aid. Today, we're off to Rochester, New York, a city with a large African American population, where companies stepped up 50 years ago with a forward-thinking jobs plan. A half-century later, we found some surprising insights on what happened to the best of intentions and why more money isn't the answer. Our cover story is Black to the Future. Kerwin Jackson is a go-getter who started working at age 12.
You need to be on time. You need to be willing to do what needs to be done. You can't say that's not my job.
He's worked his way to head of shipping at Panther Graphics, a Black-owned business in Rochester, New York. Taylor Jackson, no relation to Kerwin, is the owner's daughter and a company vice president.
We offer high-quality products, high-quality services, and we can compete on a national level. Yes, we're Black-owned. Yes, we love being that, but we're also so much more. Our stitcher machine over here for like brochures.
But such success stories are surprisingly uncommon in a city that's 40% African American. Rochester has been home to giant companies like Kodak, Bausch & Lomb, Xerox, and Wegmans. Yet one recent analysis calls it the worst place in the country for Blacks to live. Decades ago, here in Rochester, there was a major push by big companies to diversify and create opportunities for the large number of Black residents. There's now widespread recognition that it didn't produce the results people hoped for, and there could be lessons learned for the future and for other cities.
Needless to say, the area is a shambles.
The flashpoint for change were riots that broke out in 1964. Police were accused of being too forceful with a drunken, disorderly Black man who resisted arrest. Bystanders hurled rocks and bricks at police. 1,500 National Guard troops were called in to quell 3 days of looting and fires. There were hundreds of injuries and arrests. In the aftermath, Rochester's major companies launched a push to address the economic plight of the expanding Black poor population.
One of the local business leaders, I think it was Xerox at the time, started opening up doors. Kodak opened doors. I don't think doors were opened before to men and women of color in Rochester and some of the bigger companies.
Robert Duffy has been Rochester's police chief, mayor, and New York's lieutenant governor. Today, he heads the local Chamber of Commerce. So elaborate on that just a tad. The companies at the time said, we have a problem, we want to help be part of the solution.
It was, I believe, the CEO or chairman of Xerox drove right down into the middle where the riots were, met with some of the ministers, and doors opened. So clearly there were issues that you can't deny where there were walls and barriers at one point. But I'm not saying things changed dramatically after that, but at least it began to change.
Were you at one time one of the highest ranking Black employees at Kodak?
Yes, I was.
Dennis Bassett was working his way up at Kodak back then as the company set a goal of filling more jobs with African Americans. After they did an initiative to bring on board more minority workers, do you know what they reached in terms of percentage or ratio?
You know what? That's interesting, and as high up as I was in the organization, I never knew that data. Data kept very close to the vest.
Interesting.
Kept very close to the vest.
Nobody denies doors opened and there was a sense of optimism. But 50 years later, life is still dismal for much of Rochester's Black community, and for that matter, others across the nation. Today, Blacks are the U.S. racial group most dependent on government aid. 40% qualify for welfare, compared to 21% of Hispanics, 18% of Asian Americans, and 17% of whites. More than 1 in 5 Blacks are living in poverty, triple the rate of whites. In Rochester, it's even worse. More than 1/3 of Blacks are poor.
But you know something? It is 2022. And we're asking the same questions in 2022 that we asked in 1970. We're having the same bottlenecks of how to get people of color, African Americans in the job force in 2022 that we asked in 1970.
Looking back, Bassett says the best of intentions didn't always come with follow-through.
I know the years that I worked at Kodak, I rose through the ranks and had an opportunity to be assistant to a senior vice president at Kodak, Frank Strong, who was very, very actively and positive on trying to bring African Americans into the organization. But I think the one thing that caused the programs not to gain the kind of traction that it should have gained is that you've got to sell it to the first line managers. There's a lot of obstacles in looking at a pool of applicants and saying, if I've never, and I bet you there's a lot of people in middle management never sit in a classroom with an African American. I'm going to give that person a chance. That's a big leap.
But that was in the 1970s.
Right.
Do you think today is vastly different in terms of how management would think and who's there when looking at the job pool?
Another good question, and I would hope so. And I know in corporate America, people want people around them that they're comfortable with. And I don't think that's any different than any walk of life.
Many also blame Rochester's failing schools, among the worst performing in the nation, despite a $1 billion renovation begun 7 years ago.
We have a school system that has graduated anywhere between 38% when I was mayor at one point up to maybe 50 or 60%. And a local community college will tell you that 100% of those graduates have to go through remedial education courses before they're ready to take college courses.
How
So
can
the
that be?
education systems. It's not based on money because it's funded tremendously. One of the highest per capita funding mechanisms across New York State and the country. I'm going to say it's probably per capita upwards north of $30,000 per student. You look at generations of high school dropouts. You cannot get a job and make $100,000 today if you dropped out in 10th grade.
Which helps explain why so many people here are unemployed, while the Chamber of Commerce has 6,000 job openings listed.
And there's a thing called the benefits cliff. If somebody's on public assistance, and we've had this happen many times, maybe with a couple kids and child care subsidies, they might be getting around $52,000 a year.
To not work and just
To not
get
work,
benefits.
you're being, and you can't work, you're on social services, on public assistance. Our new mayor coming in, he's a city kid, grew up here. Mayor Evans, I think, brings hope that a lot of things he gets and understands, he'll help elevate some of those systems.
In fact, there are a lot of folks in Rochester who seem to be pinning hope on Mayor Malik Evans, who took the job January 1st. What are the lessons learned here in Rochester that might apply to other cities that are looking to do the same thing?
You can't give someone a $50,000 loan, and if they have no skills, expect them to be able to be successful.
A lot of people say private companies have a role, government has a role.
I think private companies actually have a bigger role in government. But the power that we do have is the convening power. And that's the role the government can play, the convening power, to get people in rooms like this to say, what can we do to work together to do that? That is, I think, one of the key ingredients that was missing before, and something that I think a role a government can play now.
When it comes to figuring out how Rochester ended up largely back where it started 50 years later, the answer turns out to be that a lot more is needed beyond offering jobs on paper.
Don't keep putting money into bad systems. Bad systems will ruin good people. And I think education, economic development, preparation, you have to take a step back and start looking what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I think that aligning all those different systems is important. And right now they're not aligned. I think they're not. And if we don't fix these things now, we'll have the same conversation. Maybe somebody else 10 years down the road will have these same conversations, because this movie has played out here for a long time.
Back at Panther Graphics, Jackson, who's 23, is training to take over the family business. What would you say on a national level?
I think it's time to get creative. Yes, it may be a failing school system. Yes, it may be a failing housing environment, but why? And I think that's where we're failing ourselves, is not trying to find the why, but always looking at just on the surface level.
What do you see in 10 years for this city?
So 10 years from now, I do see Rochester on the right path. I think I always go back to education. I think we're failing our students' education right now, and they're the future. So I think investing into that, 10 years from now, Rochester should be on its way back up.
There are still many programs going in Rochester to help. 4 local minority-owned businesses just completed a 6-month training program by Goldman Sachs to help them set up more efficient and profitable systems at work.